Alright guys, so we've got one today. This is a wall art piece for a customer. They came in with a sketch, let me kind of play with the proportions the way I felt was right. This is just a bunch of plasma cut squares that Tommy wire brushed off, cleaned up, very minimal prep to them. We're gonna put them together with a little bit of angularity, a little bit of depth, and then I'll show you how I mount these to a brick wall using the TrueWeld TWI 321 stud welder. Let's go. Alrighty, so we jump right into it. The basic idea here is these are squares. They nest inside of each other pretty well. It was like 2 or 3 stacks of squares, and I had some other stuff on the table too, cutting out these letters, so very little waste on the material here, which is good for the bottom line, with that little slow-mo of the plasma there. And after pulling all the pieces out, I hand them over to Tommy, and he wire brushed them off camera while the rest of them were cutting out. Give me that one. No, that one. Alright, I'm gonna hand you some and just have you run them right over there and cut them. Alright. So the basic idea here is that the customer came in with a sketch showing which pieces should interlock with which, how they should look, a little bit of angularity and depth to it. It's always great to have to work off of. And instead of trying to figure all that out before we plasma cut everything, we instead cut all the squares out and then just laid them out and made marks. I did that just with a Sharpie, hand them to Tommy, he cuts them, gives them back to me, and I interlace them, and then we just weld through the spot we just cut. All those cuts are on the piece that's going to be in the bottom at an intersection, so you're not going to see those, you're not going to see the welds, and we don't need to focus on having them be super pretty. And then on top of that, because none of these pieces lay perfectly flat on each other, I didn't even need to grind those tacks from putting them back together, which just made this go super quick. And see, it took about 20 minutes to get everything more or less laid out, definitely at least interlocked correctly. And then we're gonna jump over and actually start beefing up all of those welds. The way I did that was running off the HDP ProPulse 220. There's some links down in the description. This is 12 gauge steel, but I'm actually using the machine set to around about what you'd want for 14 gauge. And the reason for that is these welds don't need to be super strong. They're still going to be plenty strong as is, and we're trying to put as little heat into the steel as possible, especially so that we don't have the front side of the welded parts showing a weld scar or any heat distortion. With everything more or less positioned where it needs to be, I'll cover that in a minute. From the front, at every joint that I can get into, I'm just going to put kind of a fat and sloppy tack in the opening or the little V groove formed where 2 pieces overlap, and that's really just to position them, keep this alignment here. I didn't want to try and get all this set up from the back. It felt like there's a good potential there to kind of miss what the customer was looking for. Then we go and flip the piece over and very intentionally left the biggest center joint unwelded, and that's because the customer did have a specific dimension they wanted to hit with this, so we pull a tape and make sure we're getting that dimension. With that done, the last major part of the construction here is to weld out as many of those joints as we can get to from behind. This is where we can actually lay a weld in, not worry too much about messing up the face of the piece. Of course, we're still running that 14 gauge setting on the ProPulse 220. It is basically exactly what you need. It's running 17.5 volts, a little bit over 100 amps, and with this 030 wire, it's about 175 inches a minute. Here you're seeing a couple arc shots actually showing off that the welds are a little humped up. I'm not worried about trying to get them to wet in entirely. I'm not worried about any toes I have on them. Again, it's a wall art piece. It really just needs to hold itself together long enough or strong enough to go through powder coating and be moved around. Once it's on the wall, it's going to be entirely supported and we're not worried about it. I know that's gonna hurt the feelings of some of the welders out there, but that's the reality of it. When you're doing art pieces, pretty much everything is gonna be overbuilt just by the fact that you're using steel, let alone spending the time to weld out both sides of a joint. So don't stress. We'll go through, hit the rest of the joints. Of course, always take a minute to look around and find the one that you missed, and then we'll flip it back over and start working through cleaning up as many of the visible joints on the front as we can. There's some overhangs there that are like a 1/4 inch, so it was hard to fill those with the initial tack, and there's going to be a little bit of grit and bird poop looking welds there, but we can deal with it. Now I know I'm going to get comments down below. I appreciate them. So does the algorithm. I'm using a grinder with no guard. I don't have gloves on. I'm probably killing a couple babies or something like that. Don't worry about it, guys. Everybody gets to make their own choices based on safety and what you think is reasonable. This is what I think is reasonable. These are the risks I'm willing to take. I'm not working for somebody else and potentially messing up their workers' comp. And yeah, I don't let my guys take these same risks. You know, it's the joys of self-employment, I guess, is you get to determine your own risk level because you're the only one that's responsible for it. So normally I'd get the stud welder down so you guys could see it, all that, enjoy how pretty it is, see what it does. But the thing I actually really like about this stud welder is the ground clamp and the gun that actually holds the studs. It's a good thing we didn't just clean. Are actually long enough that it can live right there, out of my way, not getting crud all over it, and I only pull it down when I actually need it. If you guys want to see a little bit more about it, I got a card right here to a video where I used it more in depth. Basically, you just set the stud welder to whatever thickness of stud you're using. We're using some real short 1/4 20 studs, which will allow this thing to get powder coated, and then we'll come back, use a coupler nut, a female to female long nut, to put whatever actual stud size we want for the final install, so we have a little flexibility there. And just so we don't have like a 4-inch stud hanging off the end of this while it's going through powder coat and all that. That's not fun. All right, so the stud welder charges up. It's already ready to go. You got a little trigger button right there. You literally just pick where you want your stud. I'm trying to choose kind of flat areas like right here. You press down, pull the trigger, boom, stud's on there. Here, another one. Right there. And you can look at it, but it's pretty bright, so don't. Now, of course, the stud welder is not a small investment. You really want to buy a high quality unit. These are not the same types you're going to see for like auto detailing where they're just a couple $100. You know, this is a lot of power hitting all at once. And that's why you get that nice weld. So see where these are. Let's flip this over. And this is where a stud welder really shines. Is on the face now. It's perfect. There's absolutely nothing you have to do at the end. No polishing, no grinding, no finishing discs. This was the thing that really excited me about. Oh God. This is why we can't make nice videos, Tommy. So the stud welder is it's something I was really excited about for sign usage, and I'm going into it. TrueWeld sent it out for me to show you guys what it's about. That's the end of it. They didn't require I do any of this. I really like this piece of equipment. It's something that just makes the shop faster. It's not the first thing you're gonna buy when you're setting a shop up, but once you're up and running and tooled up and functional, this is something that really should be on your list. What I'm trying to say here, guys, is that at the beginning of your business, you're gonna have more time than money. And eventually you're gonna get to the point, if you're doing things right, where you have more money than time. That's when you start investing in some of these nicer tools to save you more time. You can see how fast it was to do all those studs on the back. Of course, you could have grabbed a piece of threaded rod, tacked it into place. That works too. We've got all these little studs, and they're not hot. That's another cool thing about them. This guy is pretty much ready to go. We're gonna give it a final once over, then it'll go out to powder. So following up on the little safety rant earlier, here's a point where it is valid to critique me. I'm doing these quick little fixes and I didn't take the time to grab eyes or ears. You know, taking some grit to the eyeball, not a good time. I should have done it. I'm wrong here. I'll accept that. You can make the critique about this not being loud enough to need ear protection, but tinnitus sucks, so stay safe out there. With all of this cleaned up, a couple little minor things here that, you know, really, it's probably the customer's not going to see it, but let's make sure it's done right anyway. We'll clean it up, and then this piece gets thrown on the stack. You can see here we have a bunch of stuff waiting to go to powder coat. It was a real busy time in the shop, and when we get it back from powder, we'll jump over to install. Now, personally, I don't like to ask a customer if I can film in their home. A business is a different thing, but your home is your castle, and unless they found me through YouTube or they know what I do here, I generally just don't even ask. Just a personal preference. So we're going to jump over to a very similar project where I installed some stud-mounted letters in a concrete wall. It's the exact same process. The first thing we're going to do is locate where we need our holes. In the on-screen example, you see I had a stencil cut because we had a lot of holes and a complicated logo. In the case of the art piece, what we do is just take a paint pen and put a little dot of paint on the back of all the studs and then press them against the wall. That leaves us a whole bunch of little dots so we know where to drill. We drill those out. You can use anything that'll drill through your medium. I use an SDS. This tool is a great little compact unit that you can run one-handed. Then once those holes are opened up enough, in this case we're using 1/4 inch studs. So I actually drill them out at 1/4 inch, and then I have a bit that has just been burned up and melted. You get that little mushroom head. I run that in again just to open the hole up a tad bit more so you have some play there. The holes are then going to have an appropriate adhesive applied to them. In the on-screen example, you are seeing that we're using just a standard liquid nails because it's basically the same color as the wall. For the art piece, we used a PL3000, again because it's the same color as the wall they use. In all of these applications, there's a couple dozen different adhesives you can use, and if you can color match, that's even better. Again, you got to remember it's an art piece. It's being put in the wall with probably 20 times the mounting force that it really needs to stay on there. So you don't have to stress too much on getting each and every one dead perfect, but just make sure that once it's in the wall, it'll stay there. The final assembly really is just, with those holes drilled and glue ready in them, it's just push the piece into place. I do like to do a test fit before I push the whole thing in just to make sure all the holes do actually line up correctly. And in this case, we only used, I think, about 5 or 6 of the studs. Ultimately, I put about a dozen studs on there, and the coupler nuts are 7/8 of an inch long. That gave us the standoff off the wall we wanted. The customer was looking for an inch, and it's good to go. This final project came out beautiful in my book. It's a great little courtyard at the customer's house, and it kind of finished off this one big blank wall. I hope you guys liked it. If you did and you want to stick around, hit subscribe. If you want to join the folks on the screen and support what we're doing on Patreon, I sure would appreciate that. We'll jump into a bid breakdown on how I bid this project and what the real numbers were right after this video posts. And until next time, thanks for stopping by.